from St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
Jennifer, you make some good points there, and yet the part of me that used to manage a group of people, I'm thinking, do I really want my employees being focused on their fitness and their family when I want them to be working 8 hours a day and be really intense about it? And I have a feeling I've just said something I'm not supposed to say here. This isn't how we're supposed to feel. But I don't know, I find myself reacting like, are they working on their fitness during office hours? Is that something that people like me need to let go of? But what do you think, Jennifer?
I think it's a very small-minded attitude to have. If you have employees that you can't trust to get the work done, then that's a bigger problem.
Jennifer, I really appreciate that you kept using the word trust, because I think that's really the key thing, that too many managers haven't trusted their workers. That's why they've been so resistant in the first place to telework.
I'm Sarah Fenske. If your employer is gearing up for a return to the office, you're not alone. Across the country, companies are beginning to reopen offices, and workers are again contemplating the cube life. But not all workers are sure they want to return to the status quo. St. Louis resident Bria Jones works at the Brown School at Washington University. She's one of many locals who's seen the advantages in work-from-home life.
I started working remotely soon after the pandemic in March, and I'm now expected to go back into the office starting in July. I currently love working from home. It saved me a lot of time, and my commute was also great because I did not have to get up in the morning. So I got some extra sleep. But I'm going to start going back into the office 2 to 3 days a week in July.
Now, ready or not, that day is coming for Bria Jones and for a whole lot of other workers around the metro area. And joining us today to discuss this issue is David Kaplan. He's a professor of management and the chair of the Department of Management at St. Louis University. David, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
David, so many people worked in offices for decades and never really gave it a second thought. Why does going back feel so hard for so many people?
You know, it's been over a year. I mean, I think that's really the part of it. It's been long enough now that people, just got into the habit. So, I mean, I guess there's a few different factors that resulted. I think it's also important to preface all this saying we're talking about a segment of the work population, right? There's a lot of people who never had the luxury or the ability. There's so many essential workers that, I feel I should just thank all the essential workers who have been doing all their time. But people like myself, I'm a college professor. I have a lot of friends and family and neighbors who work in offices, and those are the people we're talking about today. Some of it is, just like the woman you just had talking, right? You save a lot of time and money, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, even for myself, it's like I was coming in, I'm like, oh, is there going to be bridge traffic? I didn't have to worry about bridge traffic for over a year. Part of that is just the convenience. I mean, some people feel they could get a lot more done, and I can control my hours, and I don't have someone looking over my shoulder. But then there's also sort of the comfort, right? So, do you shake hands? Do you... what's it like going to be in meetings again? Just sort of that sort of interactions. You're going to be close. Like, is it safe to come into the office, right? So there's going to be a lot of people. That's another reason why. Is it going to be safe? Are people vaccinated? And if they're not vaccinated, what are those issues? And sort of that leads into the next issue. I personally have a 6-year-old son. He can't be vaccinated. So is he going to be protected? Or if you have someone else at home that you're caring for. And at the flip side or extension of that, do you have someone to watch the person who you've been caring for? There's a lot of schools that haven't necessarily reopened. Childcare isn't easy. So I might be fine with coming in, but do I have that ability? Like, who's going to watch my son?
There are so many issues around this. Like, as you sort of lay this out, it feels like something that we think of as one question. There's actually like 8 questions that are a part of this year. I saw this survey. This is a recent survey of 1,000 U.S. adults. It suggested 39% would consider quitting if their employer was not flexible about remote work.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty high statistic right there.
I think it is. And I was just actually, reading another statistic. I'll credit Sherm for this. They were publishing a survey or talking about it where people would give up a quite sizable raise. I think I might actually said $30,000 in order to work at home.
$30,000?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, but heck, yeah, I mean, there is definitely a large monetary value to work from home, but also a lot of people moved away. So I know a lot of people moved out of big cities like New York and, hey, I can save a lot of money and also not be someplace that is in complete lockdown. Well, do you want me to come back to work? Like, am I moving back to New York? I mean, I sort of liked living wherever I was living remotely. And so, yeah, so some people, even if they wanted to, that would be yet again another reason I can't physically come back to work.
It is interesting. I'm not going to name names here, but I know at least 2 people who left the area that they were living in. They didn't tell their boss, and they've been living cross country. They've become very happy with their life.
Yeah.
They're waiting for the return to come back to the office as the moment of, I might have to quit this job.
Yeah. And exactly. And I think you're seeing that too, that you see people that when they're being forced to come back, maybe it's because they moved, maybe because it's comfort level that, or maybe they've had a side gig, right? So that, I've been working on this on the time. I really like how much time. Why do I have to give this up or this has been going well? Yeah, now's the crunch point. I'll stop doing my day job. And so, I think there's all these factors that employers need to be aware about.
So we got a voicemail from Catherine, who lives in University City, and she told us about her situation. Here's what she said.
I got hired for a new job about a year ago, right in the midst of the pandemic. So there's no returning to office for me. I'm really kind of nervous about it. I'm going to the office full time starting, I think, July 1st. And one of my pandemic hobbies is baking sourdough bread. And long story short, I'm kind of going to be sad because I can't wake up at, 7 a.m. and start making some bread and, do my folds as necessary. So that's that. I'm kind of nervous about it. I don't really know any of my coworkers or what the office dynamic is. And I'm going to miss baking bread.
And that is Catherine from University City. We want to hear from you. We're curious to hear about your situation and how you feel about it. Is your employer summoning workers back to the office? Maybe you've been working at home this whole time. You can't wait to go back. Either way, how about you give us a call? We're at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air, or you can email us at talk@stlpr.org. David, hearing from Catherine first, my heart goes out to anybody who is going into the office for the very first time. That is such an anxiety-inducing situation on your first day in an office. It seems like it would be even weirder after you've been working with everybody for a year.
Well, exactly. That's what I was going to say. I mean, these are your colleagues, but they're not your colleagues, so it's how to do it. Although I would probably just say somewhat comically, but also honestly, bring a couple of loaves of bread. That's one really great that would be really one great way to get people to start liking you. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, I don't know. We actually also had in my department. So again, I'm a department chair, so I'm a manager as well as someone who studies management. She not only came to started this year, but she moved to St. Louis, right? So we did our best to do it. We made sure that tried to do some chats and stuff, but it's hard. And yeah, you're a stranger, but not a stranger. But, I think everyone is aware of that. I think everyone is, should be making the extra effort. So I wish her luck. But, yeah, just treat it sort of like your first day. Hopefully go out to lunch with somebody, make sure that you have some coffee time. But also try to do that ahead of time. I mean, if you've been working there for a year, you've obviously been working with someone closer than other people, and I would really recommend, either having a Zoom coffee hour or grab lunch or meet them at a park sometime before, just so that at least you have some human interaction before you actually show up in the office.
That's a good idea. Have that face-to-face, even if it's just with one person off-site. This way you're not coming in completely cold.
Yeah.
I want to go to the phone lines. Jennifer is calling from Creve Coeur. Jennifer, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I'm curious to hear about your situation.
Well, I'm an HR manager who is actually responsible for the return to work site effort in my organization, and I'm very fortunate to have the luxury of having been able to work from home for the last 15 months. And I just wanted to say I really encourage employers, to ask themselves the question, why do we need people to come back? In some cases we do, but it's not necessary. If one thing the pandemic has taught us is that people can be trusted to do their jobs. They can be trusted to do them outside of the confines of a traditional office. And from a talent, pool perspective, we have an ability to not only retain the great talent we have, but also to attract new talent and better talent in some cases even more geographically than we did before, because my organization is a mixture of in-office, completely virtual, and hybrid. And giving employees the chance to decide which ones they want to be based on, what's possible in their role is so important.
And Jennifer, are you finding that people, as you guys gear up for this return, that there are some people who are excited to come back?
Not as many as people think. And I think that's, because this has been, not only one of the most stressful times in our lives, but it's also been a time where people have changed their patterns and their habits so that instead of work being the focus of their life, they've now developed better, in some cases, family routines, health and fitness routines, and, better for the environment for everybody not to be driving and sitting in traffic, which seems like a really ridiculous notion now.
Jennifer, you make some good points there, and yet the part of me that used to manage a group of people, I'm thinking, do I really want my employees being focused on their fitness and their family when I want them to be working 8 hours a day and be really intense about it? And I have a feeling I've just said something I'm not supposed to say here. This isn't how we're supposed to feel. But I don't know. I find myself reacting like, are they working on their fitness during office hours? Is that something that people like me need to let go of? What do you think, Jennifer?
I think it's a very small-minded attitude to have. If you have employers that, if you have employees that you can't trust to get the work done, then that's a bigger problem. It's not that their fitness or their families are getting in their way. And by the way, if they are not taking care of their family and their own health, they can't be great employees anyway. So, this is a time for us to think about employees not just as workers, but these are human beings. And you've been able to manage pretty good work out of them for a long time without having them in the office. And so for me, leaders who really put their foot down and say, oh, it has to be this way, they don't have any credibility anymore in that argument.
Well, Jennifer, I feel very called out right now, but appropriately so. I appreciate you setting me straight there. That perspective, I think, is really good. David, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Jennifer, I really appreciate that you kept using the word trust, because I think that's really the key thing, that too many managers haven't trusted their workers. That's why they've been so resistant in the first place to telework. But also, again, what you're talking about, work-life balance is so important, and then flex work. But again, if you sort of think about your commute time as part of your day, right? So I would leave home at 8 o'clock. I wouldn't get home at 6 o'clock, and I had a lunch hour or lunch half hour, and I had break time, right? So I start working at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I decide to do my workout at 11 o'clock in the morning instead of at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm still giving you my 8 hours. And also, Jennifer, I don't know whether you've had this at your work, right? There's a lot of meetings that could never happen or won't happen now in person, because I had meetings that ended at 11 and meetings that started at 11. Like, it takes me 20 seconds to change from one Zoom to another Zoom. It's going to take me time, even if it's leaving one meeting, going to another, even if it's just saying hello, goodbye to people. So there's a lot of things that in some ways that we can do a lot more when we're working remotely as long as we're able to manage our time.
Jennifer, do you feel that overall your remote employees are just as efficient, just as effective as the people who've been laboring at the office?
No, I think they're more effective and more efficient. And I know for a fact that they're oftentimes working more hours. And it may be that they're trading, if they were commuting for an hour and a half a day, they might be just giving the team another 45 minutes of their commute time back in extra work, and then using that other 45 minutes of commute time on taking a walk or, having the time to focus on their faith or, making better, more nutritious meals or, helping their kids with their homework. So I do think that if you're talking about managers who are, feeling like they need to have people back in the office, I think that's a real wake-up call for people who are just really bad managers.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for that perspective. That is a strong perspective there. And if you're listening to this conversation, whether you agree with Jennifer or disagree with her, our phone lines are open. We are at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. We do need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
And now back to our conversation. Our guest today is David Kaplan. He's a professor of management and the chair of the Department of Management at St. Louis University. And we're talking about how many employers are moving back to asking workers to do their jobs in person. And as David was very smart to stipulate early on, we're talking about a very small group of workers. A lot of people were in person throughout this pandemic. They kept this country going. But many people have been lucky enough to work from home. That's changing for many of them. Now, I do want to read an email that we got from a listener. This is someone who didn't give their name, but they write, they're referencing a voicemail that we played early on in the show from a young woman who works at Washington University and wasn't excited about going back. This emailer writes, in thinking about the WashU employee who didn't want to come back to campus, it seems a little tone deaf to not want to come back to work when a select few of us have been back for almost a year. Students have been back on campus for a while, and the few of us on campus facilitating student research could use help in person to fulfill the day-to-day duties of helping students. We're spread thin, providing in-person academic and social support for students. The university thrives on in-person interaction, and that is an unspoken function of being a university employee. If you've got a perspective on these questions we're talking about today, we'd love to hear from you too. Our phone lines are open at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. David, thoughts on that email? They do make a good point.
Particularly as a college professor, I know how important it is to have people on campus, but you also see that in most employment situations where you have some people who've been able to stay at home and others who have been there and been required to be there. And that's hard, and those people need to be appreciated, and those people need to be spelled, right? They need assistance. But I think it also shows, we talk about this a lot, or see this a lot in human resources, that there's sometimes two standards in organizations, right? So you have one type of employee who has to be there, and then you have another type of employee, particularly upper level or a more skilled position that has a lot of flexibility. And the people who have had that flexibility tend to take that for granted, and that sort of like staff and professional is a challenge that organizations already have. But I think the pandemic sort of has made that worse. And so one of the things, if you haven't thanked your in-office colleagues, you really need to make sure that you do that.
And if you're a manager and you could do your job from home, but there are lots of people who are having to go in and do their job in person, is this something where maybe out of solidarity, you ought to go back?
I got to be honest, I really thought about that for myself when SLU gave us the options to go remote or stay at home. And I was like, we had to offer a certain number of classes in person. I'm like, I don't want to be there, but, how do I stay home when I'm asking some other person to, again, this was early days of the pandemic, and maybe, maybe a little dramatic to say, was I asking someone to put their life on the line, and I was going to stay safe at home? And I think, you as a manager, I think managers and leaders, showing solidarity, being there is part of it. You need to be there for your employees. And I think I don't think things fundamentally changed with the pandemic in terms of management for a lot of these things. It just made them a lot more salient.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the phone line. Shelley is calling from Clayton. Shelley, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, thank you so much. I am an IT manager, and while I sympathize with everyone working from home, I cannot wait for everyone to get back in the office. There have been a lot of unique challenges of people using their home Wi-Fi and personal machines.
Oh, that's interesting. So that has added some complications just from the network perspective, Shelley.
Correct.
So are people willing to come back? I mean, is your company finding that this is being greeted with understanding?
Not so much.
Your coworkers would rather keep doing their jobs from home.
Most of them. I think we're all in the same boat here, and we've got to navigate new ways moving forward. But a lot of people have enjoyed working from home.
Well, Shelley, thank you for sharing that perspective. And David, as you and I were just chatting briefly over the break, there are some things that are easier to do when you're there together in person. I understand the previous caller who was like, it's important to be flexible, but sometimes that flexibility means people do have to come in.
Exactly. People need to come in. You need to come in to build these teams. Again, you can build teams remotely. I think it's easier, for the caller who was working for a year but hasn't been in. I mean, it's harder to really become a member of the team. But there's also, and I think it's particularly hard for new employees, when you're working in an office, just to pop your head into someone's room, it's like, hey, can you help me out with this? And those are nice to learn the job. A lot of that on-the-job training, it's much harder to do on-the-job training when you are not co-located with the other person, and it becomes a much bigger deal. So now if I have to schedule an appointment or I have to send an email admitting that I don't know something, right, I can't sort of look over your shoulder. I mean, thank God you can share screens on Zoom, but it's not nearly the same.
No.
So there's a lot of that. So, certainly once you're up and running, I think working remotely is great. But, for those people who haven't been, being able to be there in person really makes life a lot easier.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Mark is calling from Creve Coeur. Mark, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for taking my call, Sarah. Wonderful show. I just was commenting, I have started going back to the office. I'm a paralegal. I work for a solo practitioner, and he works out of his house. So it's a bit chaotic at times. I know, however, that I am motivated to do that because when I look at my production level, I am less productive working from the condo on my own, working remotely. There is still some accountability, but I think that for me, we are less productive on a very macro level as a society when everybody or a large chunk of us work remotely. The spontaneous interaction and the synergy of people having, conversations, passing each other in the office, which is one of the ways that creativity continues to flow.
Mark, I think that's a really great point there. And personally, I'm like Mark. I feel a lot more productive if I'm getting up in the morning, I am showering, I am going to a desk, and I am stuck there all day having to get stuff done. Maybe different types of people work better different ways, but there's a group of us where we need that focused environment.
Totally. I mean, people are all different. And I think one of the things that we need to remember is that one size does not fit all. And this idea that we have to trade off between being fully remote or fully online or fully in person is a false trade-off. I mean, I think some in person and some at home, I think will learn to strike the balance. And I think that's something for all managers need to realize. It's going to take a while to learn. I mean, if I cooked, we had the woman who did the sourdough bread. It takes a while to learn how to make a good loaf of bread or to make a good soup. You have to give yourself time. So both managers and employees need to give each other time as they learn that that dance. But yeah, certainly like you, it's like the caller, some of you will always be more productive in the workplace, and we need to and should support those people just as much as those who want to stay remote completely.
And Mark, we wish you the best of luck in that return as that's going on. Yeah. We also got a voicemail from Dr. Jessie Gold. She's a psychiatrist at Washington University. She's been a frequent guest on this show, and she shared some thoughts for people who are navigating the return to in-person offices.
You know, when I think about how people are going back to work right now, I can totally understand why people are anxious and why people might feel like it isn't as easy as people are saying. I think we forget that work and going back to work isn't like pressing play on a remote control and everything goes back to the way it was, and work looks different. We feel different, and there are a lot of things we haven't talked about out loud, like what the year's been like for us or what work looks like for us. And I think one of the most important things to do is be nice to ourselves about it. If it's harder than it maybe we thought it was going to be, it's okay. If it's easy, that's also fine. If work feels a little different to us than it did before, or maybe there's things about remote work that we actually did like, see if we can incorporate that into our days, like moving forward somehow. Try to be nice to ourselves, flexible if we can, and realize that it might not be as easy as we thought it would be, but it's nice that we're being able to start moving forward and having hope in it being more of a positive experience. So I think baby steps are also nice, and not having to, go full force into fear factor mode, like that old show where they just kind of dunked you into a tank of spiders instead of exposing you to one spider at a time. So if you're a little bit nervous about things, also can take it easy to go back to work or to go back to socializing, and that's okay.
And that, again, is Dr. Jessie Gold, a psychiatrist at Washington University. She always has such a great way of saying things one spider at a time. So she had some advice there for people who are kind of anxious about going back. David, what would be your advice for managers who do want people to start coming into the office more, but they don't want 36% of their employees to quit? They don't want to shock the system with the barrel of spiders.
Yeah. So, again, baby steps, or baby pull, you don't have to jump into the deep end, walk in through the shallow end, maybe have people come back 1 or 2 days a week, slowly ramp it up. A lot of employers are offering incentives or making things more pleasant in the workplace, right? So just appreciate your workers. I mean, some of this is just good management, right? To make sure your workers feel appreciative, but, maybe institute an attendance bonus, maybe have a, listen, we have vaccine lotteries. Maybe have a lottery for people who are showing up to work. Or, I suggested the one woman bring her sourdough bread. Well, you're the manager. Bring in a box of donuts or bring in a carton of grapes in case you want to be healthier, right?
There are ways.
It's berry season, right? So bring in some berries. But yeah, there's lots of little things. Make sure that your workers know they're appreciated, and to know, and also just as make sure that people know that it's okay for them to still feel uncomfortable. Don't expect people to be as they were pre-pandemic. And, just giving everyone a little time to get back to normal is important.
That's some great advice there. We did have a poll we put out to our listeners on our Twitter. That's at STL on air. We asked, how should employers handle the transition back to offices reopening after all these months of remote work? The leading answer, 67%, was be both flexible and fair. Yeah. Only 6% said incentivize being on site, but maybe that's because that you can't choose more than one. Yeah. 4% said return to former policies. People do not want to see that. 21% said give up on the idea of office. There is a vocal work from home contingency here. I want to play one more voicemail we got. This is from Micah, who lives in St. Louis. He's a writer, and he explained that his company decided to have its staffers work remotely even before the pandemic. That was fine. And then the pandemic sent the rest of his family home too.
And so my place of solitude became a place of pandemonium, and I found I couldn't even put my noise-canceling headphones on to drown it out because I was supposed to keep an ear out and for the kiddos and make sure they were okay. So it was a tough place and time to be a writer with all that noise going on. but that was my experience.
And so for Micah, this has been a hard time for different reasons than what we've talked about today. And I guess I find myself wondering, for everybody who is sad to return to the office, is there maybe somebody at home who's really happy to see them go? David, do you think there's a flip side to this?
Hey, I'm a parent of a 6-year-old. And let me tell you, the time between Thanksgiving and Martin Luther King Day when he was home for remote learning, it was nerve-wracking to have him in school the whole time, but when he was home for those 8 weeks, I couldn't get work done, right? Probably shouldn't say that. My employer might be listening. But, it was a challenge. And thank God I have a spouse who was able to be the primary caregiver and give me a lot of space. But I knew most people's reality is that you have two parents who have full-time jobs and you just can't do it. So
yeah. So some of the things about going back to normal may be good things.
Yeah.
We also heard on Twitter from Halligator005 who writes, I say keep the folks at home who want to stay home. Keeps my facility and parking lot more open, keeps traffic down, keeps restaurants less crowded. I'm agoraphobic, so the less people, the better. So there's another perspective there. One last stat I wanted to throw at you, David, in our final minute here. According to Bloomberg, only about 28% of U.S. office workers are back in their buildings at this point. Do you think that summer is going to begin to flip those percentages?
Yeah, I think the numbers are going to increase. And they're just going to have to. Will we get to the flip of that where, we have 72% of workers in there? Probably. But, will I expect those people to be there 5 days a week? I doubt that. I mean, I think partially because it's summer, but I think going in the future, I think the number of people who are going to have at least 1 or 2 days at home is, I think, just the reality.
The status quo has shifted. Well, it's been so interesting to delve into these issues today. What a lot of interesting callers we had. And David Kaplan, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It was a pleasure.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you. St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.